You know him as Ferris Bueller, the wisecracking teen who skipped school and stole America's heart. As the baby-faced charmer in War Games. As Sarah Jessica Parker's real-life romance. He's the kind of actor you root for, the kind of guy you trust. But what you might not know is that Matthew Broderick once killed 2 people. No, not on screen, not in some tabloid rumor, but on a quiet road in Northern Ireland. You might not know that, because some stains stay quiet until you shine the spotlight directly on them. I'm John Michael, and this is Hollywood in Handcuffs, a podcast about stars, scandals, and the stories they hoped would never steal the spotlight. On this episode, a Hollywood icon whose fame crossed oceans, but whose mistake did too. August 5th, 1987, Northern Ireland. Nearly a year to the day after Ferris Bueller's Day Off took the world by storm and turned Matthew Broderick into a household name. It was the kind of overcast day that seems to blur the edges of the Irish countryside. Clouds hanging low, mist clinging to the daylight. A narrow road snakes through the village of Tempo. 2 lanes, no shoulders, no room for error. Locals know to drive it carefully. Outsiders, well, they don't know what they don't know. Earlier that day, Broderick and his girlfriend at the time, Jennifer Gray, had pulled over to ask for directions. A local off-duty police officer pointed them away from the rural shortcut ahead, warned them it wasn't the safest road, too tight, too risky. But something got lost, between accents, assumptions, or just the hum of vacation. So with a thank you, a nod, and a turn of the wheel, they set off in the exact direction they'd been warned against. Their rented BMW humming down the road, their steering wheel on the right side, the car on the wrong side. Broderick driving, Gray in the passenger seat, neither of them able to imagine what's about to happen next. Over the crest of the hill, a red Volvo. Behind the wheel, Margaret Doherty, 63 years old. Known around town for her gentleness, her steadiness, her devotion to family. Sitting beside her, her daughter Anna Gallagher, just 28. They're running errands, maybe chatting about dinner, maybe nothing at all. Just 2 women, in their car, on their road, heading home. Then, without warning, impact. No screech, no skid marks, just a head-on collision, as if the road itself had folded in half. The sound wasn't cinematic. It was final. The women died on impact. The man behind the wheel, he was having the worst day of his life. While back in America, he was having the biggest year of his career. In 1987, Matthew Broderick was untouchable. He wasn't just a rising star. He was the face of a new kind of movie magic. Smart, funny, clean-cut, a little mischievous, but never mean. The kind of actor your parents liked, even if they didn't know why. He'd already played a teenage hacker in War Games, and a charming con artist in Max Dugan Returns. But it was Ferris Bueller's Day Off that made him iconic. That smile, that voiceover, that wink to the camera. He wasn't just in the movie, he was the movie. A kid skipping school and outrunning responsibility with the whole city of Chicago as his playground. Cool without trying, rebellious without risk, the boy who could do no wrong. And America loved him for it. Behind the scenes, he was quietly dating his co-star Jennifer Gray. She was riding her own wave of fame, about to premiere Dirty Dancing, a film that would launch her into the stratosphere. They were young, beautiful, and in love, and they wanted a break from Hollywood. So, they flew to Ireland. No press, no agents, just a rental car, winding roads, and time to kill. It was supposed to be a vacation. They were keeping it quiet. Hollywood relationships always came with headlines, and neither of them wanted that. Not yet. See, Matthew and Jennifer had fallen for each other on the set of Ferris Bueller's Day Off. He was the star, she was the sister. and somewhere between takes and trailers, a romance sparked. Off script, off camera, and entirely off the radar. But anyway, Northern Ireland. They chose Ireland to get away from the industry, from the noise, from the weight of being watched. No red carpets, no bodyguards. It was supposed to be a real vacation, the kind where time slows down, where you fall asleep in new towns and wake up as different people. The kind that lets you believe, even if just briefly, that the world can't find you. But the world has a way of catching up. It always does, especially when the road you're on isn't yours. The impact was instant, crushing, undeniable. When first responders arrived, the scene was already still. Rain pattered lightly against crumpled metal. The red Volvo sat in ruin. Its front end collapsed in on itself like an empty lung. Inside, Margaret and Anna, mother and daughter, were already gone. Just behind them, the rented BMW. The front was destroyed, but inside, both passengers were alive. Jennifer Gray had a torn ligament and severe whiplash, but she was conscious, alert. She'd later say the crash changed her forever. Well, it wasn't the only thing. Days after the crash, Dirty Dancing was released, and in America, Jennifer became a star. Baby was America's sweetheart. She danced, she cried, she carried a watermelon. But in real life, Gray was grieving, still healing, still haunted. Smiling on red carpets while carrying the weight of a wreck no one was asking her about. In the US, she was a sensation. In Ireland, she was a survivor, and one half of a tragedy still unfolding. In her memoir, Gray would later call the crash the moment her world split in two. One version of her became famous. The other never really left that road. But back in Ireland, the spotlight was somewhere else entirely. Matthew didn't walk away from the crash as cleanly. He'd been airlifted to a nearby hospital with a fractured leg and broken ribs, but he was awake, disoriented and confused, but awake. To the officers on the scene, he seemed shaken but not drunk. He told them he couldn't remember anything. Not the road, not the turn, not the moment of impact. He said the only thing he remembered was waking up in the hospital. It's what he'd say again and again. I don't remember. But memory doesn't always need to be present to leave a mark. The crash happened. 2 people were dead, and the man behind the wheel was Ferris Bueller. In Hollywood, the news barely made a ripple, a 2-inch blurb in the trades. Matthew Broderick injured in car crash. No photos, no headlines, no outrage. But in Ireland, the grief was heavy, real, local, immediate. Margaret and Anna weren't just names in a police report. They were neighbors, family, known faces at the store, the post office, the church. Anna had just returned from England to visit. She was engaged to be married. Her wedding dress had already been chosen. Margaret had worked as a nurse, the kind of woman who didn't need to be remembered in headlines because everyone already knew her name. And now they were gone. The community was stunned. 2 women taken in an instant, and the man who caused it, a celebrity most of them had never heard of, an American actor smiling from behind movie posters they didn't recognize. While Broderick recovered in the hospital, the police formally charged him with causing death by dangerous driving. A charge that under Northern Irish law carried up to 5 years in prison. It was serious, sobering, the kind of charge that says this wasn't just tragic, it was criminal. But the case never went to trial. There was no jury, no cross-examination, no long deliberation under bright courthouse lights. Because before it reached the court, the charge was quietly reduced. From dangerous driving to careless driving, a much lesser offense. To the public, the downgrade felt like a betrayal. But under Northern Irish law, it wasn't unusual. Dangerous driving requires proof, not just of error, but of disregard. And the simple fact that Broderick wasn't intoxicated, hadn't fled, hadn't driven at an outrageous speed, made the charge even harder to stick. And so, it slipped. Instead, Broderick appeared in a magistrate's court, the kind meant for traffic tickets and noise complaints. Small, unremarkable, just a few benches, a magistrate, and the weight of what had already happened. Broderick sat quietly, no cameras, no handcuffs, no family of the victims present. It was here that Broderick pleaded guilty to careless driving. The magistrate nodded, then read the sentence aloud. "You are fined 100 pounds. That was it. 100 pounds, roughly $175 US. No mention of the names lost, no statement about the lives that ended on that road, a number, a nod, and a man free to go. No jail time, no community service, no suspension of his license. Just a quiet conviction and a quieter exit." To the people of Tempo, it didn't feel like justice. It felt like something had been lost in translation, between fame and fairness, between local grief and global indifference. It felt like the rules had bent for someone who would never drive that road again. Like the courtroom had been as uneven as the asphalt that day. Because if it had been anyone else, anyone without a movie poster or a press agent, would they have walked away? In Northern Ireland, word of the sentence spread fast. 2 lives, 100 pounds, and a Hollywood name that no one could quite pronounce. There weren't protests in the streets, no angry mobs, just something quieter, heavier. Disbelief, resentment, the kind of ache that doesn't make headlines, but never really leaves. At the post office, people whispered. At the grocer, heads shook. And at church that Sunday, 2 pews sat empty. To the family of those lost, the verdict felt like a dismissal. To their neighbors, it felt like proof. If it had been one of their own, they'd have been behind bars before the funeral. In the years that followed the crash, the road where Margaret and Anna died stayed exactly as it was. No new signs, no wider lanes, no dedicated memorial. Just that same narrow stretch of B road, curving, rising, dipping through the hills of Tempo like nothing had ever happened there. But something had. Something permanent. Locals passed it daily. Some crossed themselves, others looked away, because every turn of the wheel was a reminder of what was lost and who walked away. In small towns like Tempo, grief doesn't announce itself. It hangs in the hedgerows, settles into the rhythm of daily life. It's in the space between conversations, in the silence between hymns, and on the road that never changed, even when everything else had seemed to. A 1989 report from the Department for Regional Development showed that, in Tempo, rural roads like the one where the crash occurred were considered among the most dangerous in Northern Ireland. Narrow, poorly lit, few safety measures. In the 5 years surrounding the Broderick crash, that same stretch of road saw several more serious accidents, though none as fatal. Locals pushed for speed bumps, signage, visibility improvements, but nothing came. And to the family, the absence spoke volumes. They didn't just ignore what happened, they ignored where it happened, as if the road, the women, the story were all inconvenient. In a way, the road became a metaphor for how quickly the world moved on, for how little changed. Broderick returned to acting. Jennifer Grey returned to press tours. America returned to its regularly scheduled programming. But in Tempo, nothing had returned. 2 women were gone, a family was fractured, and the road just kept winding. Unmarked, unchanged, and unforgettable to the people who drove it. In 2002, there were whispers that Broderick might return to Northern Ireland. Not for a memorial, not for justice, but possibly for closure. 15 years after the crash that killed Margaret and her daughter Anna, Broderick was said to be open to meeting their surviving son and brother, Martin. It would have been their first conversation since the accident. A quiet exchange between the man who had lost his family and the man behind the wheel. Martin told reporters he didn't hold hatred, that he believed the crash hadn't been deliberate, of course, and that meeting Broderick might help close the book on a chapter that had haunted him for years. But the meeting never happened. Not then, and maybe not ever. Instead, headlines returned to Broderick for a different reason. When a decade later, he starred in a Honda Super Bowl commercial, a multi-million-dollar callback to Ferris Bueller that some saw as glib insensitive, even mocking. A car commercial. Really? Because in Northern Ireland, the road hadn't changed. The families hadn't forgotten, and for many, neither had the feeling that justice had swerved into a ditch and never quite found its way back. There had been a note sent after the crash, a short apology, but no phone call, no visit, no long overdue reckoning. 2 women died. Broderick paid a $175 fine. And though he later said it was the worst day of his life, that he remembered nothing but waking up in the hospital asking, "Did I hurt them?" the silence that followed said more than enough. An apology may soothe a conscience, but it doesn't rewind a road, and it doesn't bring anyone back. In the court of law, Matthew Broderick was fined. In the court of public opinion, he was barely mentioned. And that raises a question, one bigger than Broderick. What does it really take to hold someone accountable when they're beloved, when they're famous? Is it the act that matters, or the optics? America has long forgiven its stars, especially the ones who seem harmless. Broderick wasn't caught cheating. He wasn't drunk, high, or hiding. He wasn't scandalous. He was just tragic. And that made it easier to forget, or maybe to ignore. The same media machine that catapulted him to stardom barely stopped to acknowledge the deaths in tempo. No hard-hitting exposés, no pushback, no real pressure. It's a pattern we've seen before, where celebrities are judged less by their actions and more by their branding. When Mel Gibson raged, there were headlines. When Lindsay Lohan spiraled, there were mugshots. But when a likable, mild-mannered actor accidentally kills 2 people, silence. Because there's no villain here. No rage, no recklessness, just impact. And sometimes, that's the hardest kind of wrongdoing to look at. Not evil, just irreversible. It's easier to believe in justice when there's someone to blame. Easier still when they look like someone we already hate. But when it's Ferris Bueller, the myth of accountability gets tested. And often, it breaks. Broderick didn't lose work. He didn't lose fans. He didn't lose the version of himself the public had already fallen for. Ferris Bueller still ran on cable. The voice of adult Simba still echoed in theaters. He still starred on Broadway, still made rom-coms, still married Sarah Jessica Parker. He lived the life you'd expect from someone who'd never been involved in something like this. And in the eyes of the public, maybe he hadn't. Because this wasn't a Hollywood scandal. It wasn't loud. There was no paparazzi, no leaked footage, no mugshots. Just grief, tucked away in another country. And a name that no one really wanted to stain. If Broderick had been anyone else, if he hadn't been the lovable kid who broke the 4th wall, would this story have faded? Would justice have looked different? Because in the end, fame doesn't just protect people. It reshapes the story entirely. I'm John Michael, and this is Hollywood in Handcuffs, a podcast about stars, scandals, and the stories they hoped would never steal the spotlight. If you liked this episode, follow us on Instagram at Hollywood in Handcuffs, and make sure you subscribe to the podcast. New episodes drop every week, wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, remember, some names seem spotless until the spotlight hits them just right.